In this video, we're going to take a look at different ways of representing data or sets of numbers that represent different facts. There are two big ideas that we're going to use to represent this data. The first is a frequency table. And when we see the word frequency, that means how often something happens. So a frequency table shows the number of times that an item or a number occurs in our data set. So number of times being the key there. When we see the word frequency, that means how often something happens. We can then take a frequency table and use it to create a histogram. So a histogram is like a bar graph. We'll call it bar graph-ish. That shows the frequency of data, so how often numbers show up in intervals of equal size. So those intervals are different ranges of numbers, 5 to 10, 11 to 15, 16 to 20, and those intervals are all the same size. And we'll look at how to put those together in a moment. But first we're going to take a look at a frequency table. So first we have this data here, and this data represents the number of books that students have read over the summer months. So first I want to fill in the frequency table, and then we'll use that to construct a histogram. So this is my first interval here, and this is from 0 to 2. So that would be 0, 1, or 2. So I'm going to look and see how many of those values I see in my data. So first one I have is a 2, so I'm going to just mark that off so I know I have it and put a tally. Then I keep looking, 9, 6, 4, 6, none of those are in there. And then 3, 4, 5, 8, and 4. So we're just going to have a 1 here for the frequency of 0 to 2. Our next interval is 3 to 5, so that's 3, 4, and 5. So I'm going to look through my list here. 9 and 6 don't count, but 4 does. So that's 1, no 6, 3 counts, 4 counts, 5 counts, and the 4 here again counts. We're with fifth tally, we crossed the line there. So that's 5 total. Our next interval is 6 to 8, so that would be 6, 7, and 8. So I look at 9, that doesn't count, 6 counts, so that's our first one. Then we have another 6. And then we have an 8. So there are 3 here in this interval. And our last interval is 9 to 11. So we have 9, 10, and 11. We just have 1 there. So before we move on, I want you to notice that if we look at our intervals, they're all the same length. They all have 3 different numbers in them. So when we eventually go to make our own histograms, it's going to be important that we choose intervals that have equal lengths. One cool thing that we can do with the frequencies, if we add them up, we'll get the total number of data points that we had. So 1 plus 5 is 6, plus 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10. And if I look, here I have 2 rows of 5, and that's going to give me my 10 data values. So we know that that matches up. We know we did this correctly. Once we have our frequency table, we're going to use that to create our histogram. And when we look at our histogram, there's a few things that we'll see. We always have a title. We always have labels telling us what we're talking about. And the y-axis is always going to be frequency. So we're going to use that data that we came up with here in our frequency table to fill in that frequency. And at the bottom here, we have our intervals that match up with those intervals that we saw in our frequency table. So first off is 0 to 2. I look at 0 to 2. That was 1. So I'm going to make a bar that's 1 unit tall. Just do the best you can. You can color it in if you want. And our next one, 3 to 5, was 5 units tall, or 5 units in there. So when I draw this next bar, I'm going to make sure that it touches the 0 to 2 bars. This is how they're a little different than a regular bar graph. The bars actually touch here, and we can color that in. And this goes all the way up to 5 because that frequency was 5. Next up is 6 to 8. That had a frequency of 3. So again, I'm going to make sure this touches the bar next to it. And it has a height of 3. And sometimes you'll see these with the heights written on top of them, just as a reference in case we can't see. And then our last one, 9 to 11, has a frequency of 1. So that bar, again, it's connecting. And it's got a height of 1. An important thing here, the bars must touch. That's how we know that we're dealing with a histogram. So make sure that your bars touch each other. That's how we have a histogram here. All right, next up we have data in a stem and leaf plot. And these can be a little tricky to read if you don't know the trick. So the stem is always going to be the tens digit here. And the leaf is going to be our ones digit. So 0, 4, this is the same thing as 4. 0, 5 is just 5. 0, 6 is 6. 0, 9 is 9. Here we have a 1, so the 0 is 10. The 1 is 11, 12, 13, 14, 14, 15, and 15, and 16, and 17. So that first digit is going to be our tens digit, and then we have our ones digit as well. So once we have that, we're ready to go ahead and fill in our frequency table. So we have our intervals here. This is where we're going to be looking to see whether the data falls in which interval. And then we're going to go ahead and count those. So from 0 to 4, that's 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I don't have any zeros, don't have any ones, no twos, no threes, but I do have a 4 here, so I'm going to cross that out. And that's the only one, so we've just got 1 there. Next we have 5 to 9, so I've got 5, 6, and 9, that's 3 of those. And we're going to count those here. Notice how I'm only counting numbers that are the whole number here. I didn't count the 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the second row, or the 5, or the 6, or the 7 in the second row, because those actually represent 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and so on. Next up, we have 10 through 14. So I have 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 14. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items there. And then from 15 to 19, that's another 4 that we have. So we're still counting. If I highlight those out here from 0 to 4, we just have this one. Then we went from 5 to 9, that was these values. Then we have from 10 to 14, that's these values here. And then we had our last interval 15 to 19. So we only take numbers that are in the particular interval that we're looking at. And now we're ready to go ahead and do our frequency, or our histogram. So we can see we again have frequency on the y-axis, cookie boxes on the x, along with those intervals. And our first interval is 0 to 4, and that was just 1. So we're going to draw the bar that's 1 unit tall there. Our next interval was 5 to 9, that's 3 units tall. So I'm going to make sure these touch. I'm going to color in that bar that's 3 units tall. Next up was 10 to 14, and that was 6 units tall. So again, making sure that these are connected. I'm going to go ahead and graph that bar. And our last one was 15 to 19, and that is 4 units tall. So we're going to go ahead and make that bar 4 units. So that is our histogram. All right, for this last one, we have our data here in the chart. And a lot of this is blank. So before we have you try some of this, we're going to complete some of the missing information here. So our first interval is 1 through 6. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So there are 6 digits in there. So this one ends with 6, so my next interval needs to start with 7. And now we're going to count out 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. That's 6 digits. So this is going to be 7 to 12. Since this ends with 12, our next one starts with 13. And again, we're going to count out 6 digits. So 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So our other 6 digits. This one ends in 18, so the next one starts in 19. And we're going to count out 6 again. So 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So each of these intervals is the same length. If we were to count out here, we have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. There's 6 digits there, and it'll be the same for each of the others. We can go ahead and add these to our histogram as well. Our first interval is 1 to 6. Next we have 7 to 12. We have 13 to 18, and 19 to 23. So we want to make sure that we have those intervals along the x-axis of our histogram, because that's going to tell us where we put each bar. Along the frequency side, we're going to have to wait to fill that in until we know our frequencies here. So go ahead and pause the video and fill in the second column in your frequency table. All right, so go ahead and check your work here. We have 0 numbers between 1 and 6, 6 values from 7 to 12, 3 values from 13 to 18, and 1 value from 19 to 23. So now if I want to fill in my frequencies on that y-axis, we're going to go from 1 all the way up until we get to 6, because that's the highest that we have. Now pause the video and draw your histogram. Alright, so we've made each bar the height of the frequency. The bars are touching, we've got our intervals and our frequencies here, and we are good to go.